They told him he was too fast. At 15 years old, Michael Phelps was asked to leave a youth swimming program because his presence was creating what the instructor called an unfair psychological disadvantage for the other children. The coach stood at the edge of the pool, clipboard in hand, and delivered a sentence that would sound absurd to anyone who understood competitive sports. You need to find somewhere else to train. The other kids are losing confidence. They think they will never be good enough. This happened in Baltimore, Maryland in the year 2000, at a local swim school that catered to recreational swimmers and young athletes just beginning to understand the mechanics of competitive swimming. Phelps was already training seriously under coach Bob Bowman at the North Baltimore Aquatic Club, but he still participated in community sessions, informal practices where neighborhood kids gathered to improve their technique and build water confidence. These were not elite training environments. These were spaces designed for encouragement, for incremental progress, for children to feel good about shaving half a second off their personal best. The average lap time for a 15-year-old recreational swimmer in a 50-meter freestyle hovers around 35 to 40 seconds. Phelps, at that same age, was already clocking times that would qualify him for national junior championships. When he entered the water during these casual sessions, the gap between him and everyone else was not just visible. It was devastating. Parents watching from the bleachers would see their children finish a lap and look over to find Phelps already touching the wall for his second or third turn. The psychological impact was immediate and unmistakable. Kids who had been excited about swimming suddenly felt defeated. Some cried. Others refused to get back in the pool. The instructor made the decision after a particularly brutal session, where Phelps swam a timed 200-meter individual medley as part of a friendly group challenge. He finished in a time that was not just faster than the others. It was faster by a margin that seemed to defy the basic principles of age group competition. While other swimmers were still struggling through their breaststroke leg, Phelps was already halfway through his freestyle finish. The instructor pulled him aside afterward and tried to explain that this was not about punishing excellence. It was about protecting the fragile confidence of children who were just learning to love the sport. But the message Phelps received was different. The message he internalized was that being too good, being too committed, being too far ahead of the curve was something to be ashamed of. That his natural gifts and relentless work ethic were not assets to be celebrated, but obstacles to be removed. He left that pool quietly, without protest, but something hardened inside him that day. A 15-year-old kid being told he was too much for a space designed to nurture young swimmers. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it were not so painful. But here is what no one in that room understood. Here is what the instructor and the concerned parents, and even some of the other swimmers, could not see. Phelps was not just naturally fast. He was not some genetic lottery winner who stumbled into a pool and discovered an effortless advantage. What looked like supernatural speed to everyone else was the result of training that bordered on obsession. By 15, Phelps was already swimming 6 days a week, logging over 50 miles of pool work every 7 days. While other teenagers were sleeping in on weekends, Phelps was in the water at 5 in the morning, running drill sets that Bob Bowman designed specifically to break through physical and mental barriers. Bowman had already identified something in Phelps that went beyond wingspan and lung capacity. He saw a mind that could endure discomfort longer than anyone else, a psychological tolerance for pain that allowed Phelps to push through lactic acid burn when every instinct screamed at him to stop. Bowman did not just train Phelps to swim fast. He trained him to rehearse disaster. Every session included scenarios where something went wrong. Bowman would intentionally fog up Phelps' goggles mid-lap to simulate equipment failure. He would add extra resistance to training sets to replicate exhaustion. He would place Phelps in races where he started behind, where he had to chase down faster splits, where the margin for error was microscopic. By the time Phelps walked into that community pool session, his body and mind had already been conditioned to operate in crisis mode. What looked like effortless dominance was actually the output of thousands of hours spent preparing for moments when things fell apart. The other kids in the pool were learning how to breathe correctly. Phelps was learning how to function when breathing became secondary to winning. The expulsion was not a reflection of his talent. It was a reflection of how unprepared everyone else was to witness what true preparation looked like. If you have ever wondered what separates someone like Phelps from every other swimmer who dreams of Olympic gold, this is the moment that explains it. Not because he was expelled, but because of what he did with that expulsion. Most 15-year-olds would have taken that rejection as confirmation that they were too different, too intense, too uncomfortable for normal spaces. Phelps took it as confirmation that he was on the right path. He understood even then that greatness does not fit into systems designed for mediocrity. That if his presence made other people uncomfortable, it was not his responsibility to shrink himself to make them feel better. It was their responsibility to rise or step aside. So he did not slow down. He did not apologize. He did not spend a single second questioning whether he should dial back his effort to make others feel more at ease. Instead, he doubled down. He returned to Bowman's program and told him what had happened, and Bowman smiled. Because Bowman knew that this was exactly the kind of friction that forged champions. The world telling you that you are too much is not a setback. It is a confirmation that you are doing something that terrifies people who have accepted their own limitations. 4 months after being asked to leave that community pool, Phelps qualified for the 2000 Sydney Olympics. He became the youngest male swimmer to make the United States Olympic team in 68 years. At 15, he stood on the pool deck in Sydney, surrounded by athletes 10 years older, athletes who had been swimming competitively since before he was born, and he belonged there. He did not medal in Sydney. He finished 5th in the 200-meter butterfly, but the point was never about winning that race. The point was that a kid who had been told he was too fast for a beginner pool was now competing on the biggest stage in the world, holding his own against the greatest swimmers on the planet. The instructor who expelled him probably watched the Olympics that year and realized what he had witnessed. That the boy who scared the other children in his pool was not just talented. He was inevitable. The story of that expulsion became something Phelps carried with him through every race, every training session, every moment when doubt tried to creep in. When he stood behind the blocks in Beijing in 2008, goggles malfunctioning, water flooding his vision, and still managed to win gold in the 200-meter butterfly by relying purely on muscle memory and stroke count, he was drawing on the same mental framework that had been forged in that Baltimore pool. When critics said he was washed up before Rio 2016, when people questioned whether a 31-year-old swimmer could still compete with a new generation of talent, Phelps remembered being 15 and being told he did not belong. And he used that memory as fuel. He came back and won 5 more gold medals, proving once again that the only opinions that mattered were his own, and those of the people who understood what it took to reach the top. Everyone else was just noise. Everyone else was just another version of that instructor, uncomfortable with excellence, asking greatness to quiet itself so mediocrity could feel safe. This is what the story of Michael Phelps teaches anyone willing to listen. Greatness is not comfortable. It does not fit neatly into spaces designed for average outcomes. It does not apologize for making others feel inadequate by comparison. And most importantly, it does not slow down because someone else cannot keep up. The expulsion at 15 was not a tragedy. It was a baptism. It was the moment when Phelps learned that the world would constantly try to place limits on him, and his job was to shatter every single one. That instructor thought he was protecting his students. What he actually did was hand Phelps a story that would remind him for the rest of his career that being too much is never a problem. It is a promise. And Phelps kept that promise for 2 decades, rewriting record books, collecting 23 Olympic gold medals, and forcing every single person who ever doubted him to confront the uncomfortable truth that some people are simply built different. Not because they were handed gifts that others were not, but because they refused to dim their light when the world asked them to. That is the real lesson from the boy who swam too fast. That the greatest crime you can commit is not pushing too hard. It is not pushing hard enough. It is letting someone else define your ceiling when you were always meant to break through the roof. So if you have ever been told you are too intense, too driven, too focused, too much, remember Phelps at 15. Remember that the people who ask you to slow down are not protecting you. They are protecting themselves from the mirror you hold up to their own limitations. And the only response to that request is to swim faster, to train harder, to become so undeniably excellent that the only choice left is for the world to adjust to you. Because you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to stand out, and anyone who cannot handle that was never going to make it to the finish line anyway. If that story resonates with you, if you want to keep diving into moments that reveal what true greatness looks like, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories like this waiting, and you do not want to miss them.